anxiety is not psychological, it's a physiological state. So when you use the word stress, most people think in terms of psychology, but it's a total body response to a threat. So every living creature from bacteria to humans processes the environment, processes the circumstances, looks at the threats, and then responds appropriately. So for humans, we do the same thing as my cat does, but we have consciousness. And so it turns out that mental threats are processed the same way as physical threats. So it goes to the same part of the brain. You get a total body response. We call it physiology. It's how the body functions. So this includes inflammation, or called inflammatory cytokines. It includes adrenaline, noradrenaline, the stress chemicals. Cortisol cranks up the blood sugar, and you go on high alert. You go to excitatory neurotransmitters. Your whole body's on high alert under threat. That's what it's supposed to do. So the human organism is geared to avoid threat and then gravitate towards safety to regenerate. But you have to survive. So the sensation generated by that total threat response, inflammation, adrenaline, all the type of stuff, the sensation is what humans call anxiety. But it's not a psychological diagnosis. It's just the state of your body's chemistry when you're under threat.
Parents are experiencing right now, working from home, sometimes kids are at home, much more stringent focus on safety. I mean, the whole story of the pandemic was about safety. You know, you often talk about is your physiology and your brain, if you can't separate those in your framework, but are we perceiving that we're safe or unsafe? That's kind of at the heart of what you describe. And so all of parents, all of our country went into a state of being told we're not safe. And we were, in fact, afraid of this disease. And then, of course, we were trying to keep our kids safe. So when all that is happening, there really was a lack of safety. There really was a disease that was killing many, 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 many people. How can parents think about that in a way that's helpful to their kids?
The biggest threat for every human being is their own thoughts. That's a bigger problem than the pandemic. So then you add on the pandemic on top of that, it's a big problem. Then you come to find out that families are the biggest triggers. Anytime you're anxious or angry, which by the way are the same things, something in the present reminded you of something from the past that was dangerous. So what happens, you're there, you're not here. So the essence of human relationships is awareness. And when you're angry and upset, you lose awareness. You can't see the needs of people around you. So the basis of, I'll use the word abuse, not meeting other people's needs, is lack of awareness. So when you're triggered, it turns out the families are the deepest triggers because you were programmed from your parents, you pass it on to your kids, and by definition, people that are close to each other, relationship or close friends and colleagues, they're the biggest triggers. So we recognized the last 2 years of my practice, we've watched hundreds of patients go to pain-free. But the last 2 years of my practice, we realized that the family dynamics were the biggest factor keeping people in pain. There was also the biggest factor in pulling people out of pain. So what was exciting is that people, for instance, in chronic pain are trapped by their pain. So they're already trapped before the pandemic started. And so there are over 100 million people in the United States in chronic pain. This is before the pandemic. We do know under more stress, and I use the word threat, and again, stress is so remember, stress isn't the problem, it's how you react to it. So life is stressful, surviving is stressful. You look at the history of the planet, it's all stressful to survive. So what happens, you can't avoid the stress, but you learn how to process in a way that minimizes the impact on your body.
The thing that is of great interest to me is when you use the word awareness, you mean, I think, for one thing, being able to observe our thoughts. So I think, often we talk to parents about how are you perceiving your child? What story are you telling yourself about your child's behavior? One of the things that we're helping parents realize is that, non-compliance, children not following directions, children having emotional meltdowns and, tantrums, are really a way of the child telling us a story. They don't have words to say, I'm scared or I'm sad, but they show us in their behavior. So when we can help parents change their thoughts about that yelling and screaming, then the way they think is different, but what you're saying is not only are they thinking about behavior differently, but their physiology is reacting to the yelling or the disobedience differently. Their body is reacting differently if they can tell themselves a different story about the disobedience. Do I have that right?
You do. And let's go really deep here. Okay, so here's the problem. Parents are stressed out. Okay, it's a process called mirror neurons. If I'm stressed and I'm in the same room with you, even though I'm trying to be nice, my tone of voice, my quick actions indicate I'm stressed. So it's called mirror neurons. In other words, when people laugh, other people laugh. When you yawn, other people yawn. It's not psychological. You're just stimulating that part of the brain. So if you're in a bad mood, that just comes right into the household. And again, not psychological. So one of my rules of engagement is when you have a bad day at work or whatever, never walk in the front door until you've calmed down. Because all you're doing is creating chaos. You want your house to be a place of safety for you and your family. So when you're angry and frustrated and anxious, nobody's safe. You're not safe. The family's not safe. And then, of course, the family's reacting. You react back and vice versa. And one of the cardinal rules of human behavior that's not really taught very well, Dr. David Burns taught me this, is that if we're in a relationship and you do something that irritates me, I'm the one that started the problem. In other words, I acted in a way, you reacted, then I react to you. So each person has to take full responsibility for their own behavior. If their kids are acting out, the question to ask is, what am I doing that's causing my kid to react to me? Also remember, when you're anxious and frustrated, you're going from the thinking centers down to the survival centers of your brain. You're not thinking clearly. You can't. So the blood flow shifts from what's called the neocortex, or the thinking centers, down into the midbrain or the survival centers. And why would people treat their family worse than they would a grocery store clerk? That makes no sense. You would never treat people outside your household the way you treat people in your household. Why? Because you're not being triggered by the grocery store clerk. And by the way, if you acted that way, you would be taken away, right? So we do in our household, and somehow it's become normalized. And so again, it was so powerful. The last 2 years of our practice is that when you're trapped by chronic pain, mental or physical, by the way, it doesn't matter. You're always frustrated, you're always angry, and nobody's safe. So the first person you have to calm down is you. And then it's miraculous how kids' behaviors change, or your spouse's behavior changes. So we've heard this over and over again for centuries, that the only person you can control is yourself. You can't control other people. You just can't do it. We try, doesn't work, as you well know, but as you take full responsibility for your own behavior and its affection of other people, it's magical. But this anxiety thing is a big deal. We keep treating anxiety psychologically. It's your body's state under fight or flight. And you can't think clearly. You behave badly because it's about survival, and the survival is about you. And then what's really ironic, if you look at nature in general, there are no rewards in nature for being vulnerable, right? You don't survive. That's just the way it is. Humans have the same problem, is that if you're physically vulnerable, if you walk down the dark side of a street in a dangerous city, it's a problem, right? So, but the problem that humans have is that emotional pain is processed the same way as physical pain. And so we're not safe from our own emotions. It's the same threat response. So so what happens is that we are constantly, all of us to some degree, are in our midbrain instead of the thinking brain. And we watch people around us, including ourselves, behave in ways that make no sense because we're not thinking. We can't think. The blood supply is shifted away from the thinking centers down to the survival centers, and you can't think clearly. So there's no rewards in nature for being vulnerable. It is the essence of human relationships.
Okay,
you have to tolerate anxiety. You have to tolerate anxiety and vulnerability in order to have a relationship with another person, but we're not programmed as a species to do that.
when you say calm your brain, we use that language in Peace at Home. So we say calm your brain, when you want to be interacting with your child. However, what's true now is that parents are working from home in many cases, and they don't actually they barely walk through a door when they're leaving work. They're actually in the kitchen working while the kids are doing their homework. And, there's such a, parents are saying we're not working at home, we're living at work. And I think that this is complicating what you're describing. However, to simplify what you're saying, I think you're saying, you talk a lot about safety, but safety is mostly, according to your model, from what I understand, perceived safety and threat. And though that perception is based on the stories we tell ourselves. So, you're very clear that when parents create a feeling of safety in the home, they're closer to achieving the kind of families they really want. However, many of us grew up with threatening kids as a way to win compliance. Now, kids will sometimes cooperate when they're scared enough, but you're not going to get long-term cooperation, and you're not going to get the relationships you're envisioning for your family. But I think the word safety has to be understood as, it's subjective. It's what I perceive. Like, for me, when my granddaughter is having a hissy fit and throwing her toys around, I'm just like, wow, she's really upset. But her parents might think, oh my God, she's a juvenile delinquent, because they're responsible for raising her. So it's a lot about how we interpret our children's behavior, what we tell ourselves about it, and the physiological state we go into, and how we lose our thinking ability and we go into that fight, flight, or freeze. And often for us parents, it's fight. I'm going to raise my boys, I'm going to scare them, and they'll do what I want. Do I have that right?
You're dead on, exactly right. And you get this cycle going, but just remember that anxiety is a physiological state. It is not psychological. You're not going to talk this stuff out. And also realize that when you have but the problem is our society, from parenting to society to our penal system, everything's about controlling behavior with threats. Think about it. I mean, that's why we're programmed. We were raised this way. I'm an adult, you're the child. And, we can discuss at another time this huge paradigm shift about human to human contact as opposed to parent-child. It's a big difference. So the question is, you have the power right now. We do know the research shows that under more stress, it's harder to do this. In other words, you have the balance between your stress load and your coping skills. So when your stress load or threat load overwhelms your coping skills, you go into fight or flight physiology. Then you don't think clearly, you act badly and make the whole situation worse.
I've been really looking at your material with an eye to what are practical things parents can take away in a busy, busy, busy day. And you have a very comprehensive program that has taken people from severe chronic pain to relatively pain-free. And you mean that both physically and mentally. And my job is to help parents go from pain around parenting to the joy of parenting that we're all striving for. Right. So, the one tool that I pick out from your framework, and I think the whole framework is worth folks' entire attention, but the one tool that I pick out is the expressive writing tool. And I'm doing it now 10 minutes a day, twice a day. And I'm seeing, very, very concrete outcomes from that. The thing I want to say about the expressive writing, when you tear up your free associating writing, right, it really helps you to stop taking your own thoughts so seriously. Right. Is that expressive writing one tool you would suggest to parents, or is there something else?
No, it's the absolute foundation of the entire project. There's over 1,200 research papers that describe its effects. It changes the immune system. It changes autoimmune disorders, mental health, student performance. The list is really long. And somehow so you can't control your thoughts, but you can separate from them. So to me, it's just a separation exercise. And so the research is very, very deep on this, is that humans have a need for mental control. It's that mental control that causes illness. And so the only recommendation these top scientists came up with in the 1990s that actually broke up this thinking pattern was the expressive writing. That was it. Now, it's not the final solution, without that starting point, nothing really happens. With that starting point, anything's possible. So it's the one exercise I just flat out say you have to do it. If you decide you don't want to do it, fine, I'm not your guy. I can't help you. So you're absolutely right. The expressive writing is a very concrete starting point.